Y'all there? Can you hear me? Alright, so I don't have a fancy, this is the Bunker Show, this is Papa Bunkle's dance mix thing that tells you that the show has started. That comes on at the beginning, it has graphics and whatnot. I'm sure some of you out there are pretty talented. You could come up with one and we could add it to the beginning of the shows. Who knows? I mean, I probably don't even need it. But so this is the first episode of Friday's, I don't know, come up with a name too. Ask Papa Bunkles, Ask Michael Bunker, Ask Me questions. The reason we're doing this is because no matter how hard I try to avoid them, I get tons and tons and tons of questions all the time about everything. And a lot of it has to do with our lifestyle, or questions about the Amish, or questions about off-grid living, gardening, farming, writing, publishing, etc., etc. And so I can't get to all of them, but submit your questions to mbunker@michaelbunker.com, and I'll try to, as often as I can do these, maybe every week on a Friday, answer several questions that you send in. So, without much ado, let's get to the questions for today. First of all, some ado. It's very windy today, and our internet's been out for 2 days, and we just found out it's going to be out for 3 more days. At least, because that's what they say. So they told us for days and days and days that it was our problem, and backward Amish people using solar power was causing brownouts, and my modem, blah, blah, everything else. We knew everything was working fine, but it turns out that me and several of my neighbors are all on the same segment of a tower, and that segment is out. So that's the thing. I don't have internet. I don't know how long it's going to take this thing to load up, so we'll get to it when we get to it. And it's real windy, so I have the window mostly closed. And I know you would prefer that I lowered that thing so it was darker in here, but I can move over a bit. And one of the questions I got that I didn't write on my deal is my chair. What kind of chair do I have? It is an old barber chair. It's old, and it's missing one of the arm rails, so I hit that pretty often and hurt myself. But I love this chair. It's perfect for my writing, and so that's what I use. All right, let me get to the actual official questions. And I didn't put names of who asked the questions here. This is the one I get the most often. Are you Amish? If so, what kind? If so, what modern conveniences do we have that you do not use? The Are you Amish question is, officially we are not Amish. We are plain, which is like Amish. You can usually tell from this, a man. Most Amish, almost all, do not have mustaches, because the mustache is considered to be a sign of military and violence, and therefore they don't wear mustaches. Our group, I'm in a group that's very Amish-like. We are plain, we're off-grid, and most of the same, whatever you call them, identifiers. We just call ourselves plain. So we're not officially Amish, but it's difficult because when someone stops you in the store and asks if you're Amish, in their mind they're asking, do you live on a farm with no electricity and live off the stuff you grow? Yes. So sometimes I say yes if I don't want to get into a long discussion about the differences. So Amish, Mennonite, plain, those are all kind of in the Amish category. What modern conveniences do we have that you do not use? Most of them. Now, let me explain. Most of you know this about me, but I live up there, and it's about 700 feet from here, and that's where my cabin is, or cottage we call it, and it is non-electric, and we live a plain life up there. This big room is my office, and it is powered by solar power and backup generator. We have no air conditioning, no... down here I have a fan. I think I've showed my fan a couple of times on here. But so, what modern conveniences do we have that you do not use? Excuse me. We don't allow now. Let me start this by saying there's things that we don't use for lots of different reasons. Some of them are financial. Some of them are Ordnung related. Ordnung means the rules of the community that our community does not allow. And then there's some that are just personal choice. So, for example, our Ordnung does not allow grid utilities. You can't bring in power, etc. You can provide power for things utilizing alternative energy. So, for example, for my office, like I said, I use solar power and a generator so that I can do my writing and the work that's related to my writing. And this is no different than the Amish who live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, who go to a factory that builds campers and they use power drills or whatever. Now, I could have solar power at my office, and we use a tiny bit. Like I have a solar lantern, and we use a tiny bit, but for the most part, we don't. That's personal choice. Also, there are things we don't do. For example, that are we don't have indoor plumbing. We in my office here, I have a toilet, but it's not a water plumbed toilet. It's a composting toilet, which is intelligent, and everybody should do it because there's no reason to waste 2, 4, 6 gallons of limited resource when what you're producing is actually a resource. So we don't have a refrigerator. We could have a refrigerator if we wanted. It would have to be kerosene or propane or natural gas powered. But we use a ice box just like your great-great-grandparents did. And for now, we purchase our ice, but Lord willing, in the future, we're going to build an ice house and we're going to manufacture and store ice, which is, I've mentioned that in my book, Surviving Off-Grid. We don't use refrigeration. We don't use air conditioning. We don't use, and again, those things, if I wanted those things, I could utilize alternative energy to provide them. It's not a moral decision that those things are immoral. We both financially and practically don't find them to be something that's beneficial to our lifestyle. You become a slave to those things and all of the commensurate things that pile on because of those things, electric bills and cable bills and all those things, which we don't like to have. And so most of the things you can think of that are modern conveniences we don't use. We do use cars, our group does, but mainly that's just because where we live it's not safe to ride a horse and buggy. We have no shoulders. We live in a very rural community. If we could get the county to put in wide shoulders for a horse and buggy, we would definitely do that. But until then, they use the term liberal, plain people, but that has too much American political connotations. All right, that's all question 1. If you have any more questions about specific things, lighting, we don't have electrical lighting. We use for the most part we use lanterns, kerosene lanterns, and other things. We use fat lamps, olive oil lamps, all kinds of different candles. We make candles. And I showed the other day that I have this little solar-powered lights. All right, question number 2. How much plotting and planning do you go through during your writing process? Do you just sit down and write, or do you have everything already noted somewhere? Every time it's different, depending on what I'm writing. I have a very voluminous, I guess you'd call it, memory, and so a lot of times I do a lot of planning and research, but I keep it in my head. I may have a small couple of notepads with notes. Some books take a tremendous amount of research. Osage 2 Diamonds was heavily researched, and so I might have done 4 or 5 hours or more of research for every paragraph or two in that book. whereas Pennsylvania and some others, which are purely fantastical kind of stories, those a lot less plotting and planning. I have overall plot lines and arcs in my head, and I try to do my best to reach those at a reasonable time. So every book's a little different, every story's a little different. I do it both ways. If you could, question number 3, if you could invent something without being restrained by everyday physics or financial restrictions, what would it be? Well, that's an awesome question to ask a plain person. I don't know, man. There's selfish things that I would invent that would probably be very troubling for most of you, like a global permanent EMP device. But not being selfish about it, I think that if I could invent something that I just had to come off the top of my head, this is what I want right now. I want a pod. Nick Cole talks about it in here, and it's something I'd actually considered long before I read about it in Nick Cole's book, and that is, in the book, the suite, he's in a jet plane, and he's in a suite, and I don't want to give away too much of the story, but in that suite, this is a very futuristic airplane. If for some reason the plane was crashing, that suite would fill with like a foam, and the suite would eject, and you wouldn't die in a plane crash. I thought about that for some time as like a pod, small pod for small children to go in cars. I just think it's horrific and sad that anybody has to die in a car accident. I don't like automobiles. I don't like the whole philosophy of automobiles. I have a speech that my character says in The Last Pilgrims about my problem with automobiles and traveling places at 70, 80 miles an hour where 50,000 people a year get killed merely for convenience sake, and most of those being children. Had a very, very close friend, left here one day to go down to San Antonio a couple hours away just to go see the Riverwalk, and he never made it. And we had to bury him. And so I do travel in automobiles because, like everyone else, it's necessary, but I don't like them. So I would love for there to be a system. They should, by now, if we can send someone to the moon, we should have a system where you don't die in car wrecks. Some type of pod system where you get in, and on impact the thing fills with foam, nobody dies. So that's the I'm waving at my son here. Robert, I'm recording, so they may rather look at you, Robert, than me. Anyways, so that's what I would invent. If I had endless resources and physics and all that, I would. To me, there's got to be a way, inexpensively. You know, they came out with this Tesla car. That's probably a good step, but airbags aren't enough. If you're going to travel at that speed around other people's families and drunks out there and everything else, they ought to be able to have a way where you don't die if you hit something. All right, next question. Number 4, what would you consider a dumb question? Oh, there's a lot of dumb questions. People always say there's no dumb questions. There are dumb questions. A lot of times a question becomes dumb because of the way that it's asked. For example, the question about what conveniences do you use? That's a politely asked question. A dumb way to ask that question would be, oh, so you're Amish, and you use an iPad. Well, aren't you a hypocrite? How do you explain that? That's a dumb question. Because I would answer that guy. I said, hey, I noticed that you're a techno English, and you don't have an implanted microchip that freezes your whole body, and they can chop off your head, and you can be reanimated sometime in the future. Why don't you have that? Because nobody has all technology. We all make decisions every day what technology we're going to use. You draw the line at a different place than I do. So I think it's a dumb question when it's arrogantly asked. And it shows a complete, profound misunderstanding of an entire culture's views on technology. We're not anti-technology at all. We use it every day. This is technology. You know, that's technology. Oh, I forgot to do my product placement. This is technology. I need a can that says, insert your product here, you soda people, because I would drink it. I don't drink sodas, but I'd do it for money. I don't know if I would or not. We'll see. I'm just saying, hypocrisy is in the eye of the beholder. You never know, what kind of questions are dumb. Okay. I don't know if people even get my sense of humor sometimes. All right. If you had the ability to add one work of fiction, not your own, to everyone's reading list, what would it be? Well, if I had the ability to add a work to everybody's reading list, I would have the ability to change that rule so that it could be my own. But because of the question, that's a difficult one because I don't read. It actually would cost me to go way back into how I became a science fiction writer to begin with, which is it's a long and winding road. So it's difficult. I don't read this stuff that most of you people read, and I mean you people as the English. I mean that in a completely non-racist way. I mean sci-fi people. I'm not a big fan. I've never. That's not really been my history. If you look through all of my books around here, I have very little sci-fi. I've started to learn, and I've enjoyed what I'm reading. So sometimes you don't read something because it's just not your deal, but it doesn't mean it's not good, and it doesn't mean you won't like it if you read it. This is a great book, Nick Cole's book, and I enjoyed reading it. It's one of the best reads I've ever had. So, this is one. This is a series of short stories by Jack Finney. 12 short stories. I read this all the time, and this is going to come up again in a later question. If seriously, I understand some people don't like classics. I read classical literature, mostly Russian literature, and I understand that some people don't like it. And there's a combination of reasons why. Not the least of which is that the public school system has failed in trying to force people to read things at an age when they're not prepared to read them. So they grow not to like something that they would like later on in life when it's actually appropriate to understand the metaphor and all that stuff. So if I could actually get anybody to read any book, have everybody read it, I would ask them to read Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's a nonfiction book, but it's a life-changing book. It would actually fundamentally change the way that you look at yourself and the state and freedom and everything else. And of course, I'm disqualifying the Bible here because I know a lot of people wouldn't read it anyway, and some people have some hostility to it. So I'm having to really dance around the question. As far as fiction, Tolstoy's War and Peace. It's a fantastic book. I read it. I tried to read it 7 or 8 times, and I hated it, just like everybody else hates it. It's 300-400 pages of parties and inane details about the life of Russians. And when I finally told myself I'm going to read the whole book, I finally realized that that's part of the story. That's part of what Tolstoy was doing. He wanted to draw you into this really inane, aristocratic lifestyle to understand why the war happened and why so many people died and why life changed and eventually what would lead us to the Russian Revolution. And so I would definitely have people read that. There are so many, pure fun that kind of fits into sci-fi. I think I got it here. This is the second one of the book, the Jack Finney's. The first one is Time and Again. This is the second one, From Time to Time. Fantastic, literary sci-fi. So I don't have one book. If I had to say one book, everybody needs to read it, no matter what it takes, and it's yet that thick, is Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. That's my answer. Question number 6. When Harry Potter became a hit, Thousands of authors attempted to write YA fantasy. When Hunger Games did the same, it was dystopian sci-fi. What advice would you give to aspiring authors about attempting to copy market trends? First of all, you need to write what you want to write. And generally speaking, by the time some mega hit like that has hit, you're already behind the curve. However, there are other things to consider. You need to consider what you want to write, what you think is your personality and your character, what people would buy from you. Dystopian sci-fi has been around for a very, very long time. And I wrote The Last Pilgrims before I'd even heard of the Hunger Games. And in The Last Pilgrims, which came out in 2011, I was writing it in 2010. I didn't even know Hunger Games was probably out or coming out, but I didn't even know about it. I never read Hunger Games until after I read The Last Pilgrims, and when I read it, I was very surprised because, strong female character who uses a bow and hunts and ends up, in a war kind of situation. I think The Last Pilgrims is better. Maybe not better written. It was my first novel, but it's a better story. So that was my first novel. I wasn't following any market trends, but I would definitely tell people, don't just go write something because you think that that's what people are buying. Because by the time you write it and get it out, you got to remember, if it's a mainstream published book, that book was written 2-3 years ago, and it's just now getting out because those people don't know what they're doing, and so. You're already a couple of years behind the curve at that point. Now Amish Sci-Fi is just now on this kind of thing. There's a science word for that, but it's just taken off. So right now is the time to get into Amish Sci-Fi and Pennsylvania fanfic. All right, next question. Do you have a book that you go back and reread every so often? If so, what is it and why? Well, I mentioned a couple of them. I read this book, these 12 stories, I've probably read 20 times, and I read them all the time because they're so good. It's a good palate cleanser. They're short stories, and they're really, really cool and creative. I try to read some of the classics that I really, really enjoy. Some Russian novels, Gogol's The Cloak, short stories, long stories, novellas, all that. I try to read those pretty regularly. I'm trying to think. I definitely read Pilgrim's Progress every year, and so there's those kind of books. But the same ones I mentioned before. You'll find I have a stack of short stories next to my chair, and I keep short stories around me all the time that I read, and that's mainly what I read most of the time. All right, we are at, hold on, my screen dimmed. We are at the last question for today. I might be able to get this in under 30 minutes. How has your humble, off-grid lifestyle affected your ability to write full-time? Well, it absolutely is the central reason that I'm allowed, or that I can write full-time. The main reason is that our expenses are so low. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a lot of bills to pay. So because of that, I have the ability, and that doesn't mean I don't owe money or that I don't have arrangements with people, but it's the fundamental reason, because we raise a lot of our own food. I just now had a meal right before I started play, and that whole meal came from what we grew. I don't think we don't have a milk cow at the moment. We have one, but she's not had a calf yet, so she's not fresh. But so I think I had some sour cream on there that we bought. But other than that, 100% of the food product from my meal we grew. So that helps us. I can live very inexpensively, and almost 100% of what I make can go back into production, marketing, promotion, and all those things. All right, so if you have questions for next Friday, just make sure that you email to me, Email is mbunker@michaelbunker.com. Make sure you check out my website, michaelbunker.com. I put up new blog posts all the time. Today, June 27th, is the launch of Eleanor by Jason Gurley. I don't have a cover to show you, but please go buy Eleanor by Jason Gurley. He's my friend, and I want to see that book do really, really well. Coming up on July 7th, there's going to be a very, very special relaunch of Pennsylvania Omnibus at a special price, and so I'll be talking to you about that starting Monday. All right, so get your questions in for next week if you have any, and until then, I'll see you when I see you.